The tension in the Grand Assembly Hall was palpable, a miasma of political intrigue and barely concealed apprehension. Admiral Mara Selene stood at the vast viewport of Valeri Prime's political headquarters, watching the gleaming diplomatic vessels of the core worlds arriving in perfect formation. The ship's immaculate trajectories and standardized designs spoke volumes about the rigid order the Galactic Council had maintained for centuries. Behind her, delegates from 27 stellar nations fussed over seating arrangements and precedence protocols. It was the opening day of the Galactic Security Conference, an event that occurred once every 12 standard years. As the chief diplomatic representative of the Galactic Council, Selene was responsible for maintaining the delicate balance of power that had kept the core worlds prosperous and, more importantly, in control. "Admiral, the human delegation has requested docking privileges." Her aide, a tall Valerian with iridescent skin, whispered, "They've sent only one small transport. Should I assign them the auxiliary bay?" Selene did not turn from the viewport. "No. Give them standard diplomatic clearance to Bay 7. The aide hesitated. "But, Admiral, Bay 7 is reserved for third-tier species with full diplomatic recognition. The humans are—" "I'm aware of humanity's classification," Selene interrupted, her voice carrying the weight of centuries of diplomatic experience. "But this conference is about security, and sometimes security means making gestures that defy protocol. In truth, humanity had always been an anomaly in the grand scheme of galactic politics. Isolated on the edge of the Orion Arm, they had been discovered relatively late in the Council's expansion. By the time first contact occurred, humans had already developed primitive interstellar capabilities, making them impossible to simply absorb as most developing species were. Yet they lacked the technological sophistication to command respect from the core. For 3 centuries, humans had occupied an uncomfortable middle ground, too advanced to ignore, too primitive to take seriously. They were permitted limited trade rights and a non-voting observer status in the Council, but little more. Their space was hemmed in by restrictive navigation treaties and technology transfer prohibitions. Selene had never questioned this arrangement. The order of the galaxy demanded hierarchy, and humanity simply hadn't earned its place among the stars. At least, that was the prevailing wisdom. The first session of the conference began with the customary rituals. Representatives from the core worlds took their positions in the inner circle, their sumptuous attire and augmented translators marking them as the elite. The mid-tier powers occupied the second ring, while the outer circle held observers and lesser species. The human delegation, 3 individuals in simple blue uniforms, sat silently in their assigned seats near the back. Ambassador Tajir of Drexion, a planet known for its diplomatic moderation, rose to deliver the opening address. As one of the few voices who advocated for a more inclusive approach to galactic governance, Tajir was respected, but viewed with mild suspicion by the core leadership. "Distinguished representatives," Tajir began, his voice carrying the melodic inflections characteristic of his species. "We gather today to address the security concerns that—" The massive holographic display in the center of the hall flickered unexpectedly. Tajir halted mid-sentence as the official conference emblem dissolved into static. Selene straightened, instantly alert. The security systems of Valeri Prime were legendary. This was no technical malfunction. The static cleared, replaced by a 3-dimensional image of deep space. For a moment, there was nothing but the void and distant stars. Then, silently, massive shapes began to emerge from what appeared to be empty space. One by one, enormous vessels materialized, sleek, obsidian structures that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light. Their designs were unlike anything in the known galaxy, with angular geometries that suggested both aggressive capability and technological sophistication far beyond Council standards. As the ships continued to appear, 17 in total, A collective gasp rippled through the assembly hall. These were capital ships, dreadnoughts of a class that no non-core civilization was permitted to develop. Then, as the final vessel materialized, a small emblem became visible on its hull, the blue and green planet, wrapped in orbital rings, Earth's official insignia. The transmission ended as abruptly as it had begun, plunging the hall into chaos. Silence. The voice of Counselor Vorn, senior representative of the hegemony, the most powerful of the core worlds, cut through the pandemonium. This is clearly a fabrication, a primitive attempt at intimidation. Celine's mind raced. If this was real, and the transmission had borne all the hallmarks of authentic quantum-entangled communication, then humans had somehow developed technology that should have been centuries beyond their capability. We should immediately dispatch scout vessels to human space. Vorn continued, his reptilian features twisted in contempt. This charade must be exposed before lesser species begin to question the natural order. But Celine noted something in his voice that few would recognize: fear. Vorn, like most of the core leadership, had built his political career on the assumption that the technological gap between the core and the periphery was insurmountable. If humans had somehow leapt that chasm, before the council could reach a decision, one of the human delegates stood. He was unremarkable in appearance, a middle-aged man with graying hair and the weathered complexion of someone who had spent time on worlds with harsh sunlight. "The transmission you just witnessed was not a fabrication," he stated calmly, his voice amplified by the chamber's acoustics rather than any technological aid. "What you saw was the Obsidian Fleet, Earth's new defensive line. We are not here to threaten, but to announce a change in the status quo. Humanity will no longer be the road pavers for your cosmic highways, the laborers in your resource extraction operations, or the buffer between your precious core and the unknown." The delegate paused, his gaze sweeping the assembly. "We seek no conflict, but neither will we continue to accept the limitations imposed upon us. The Obsidian Fleet exists as assurance that our sovereignty will be respected. Thank you for your attention." With that, the three human delegates rose in unison and exited the chamber, leaving behind a stunned silence. The council exploded into frantic debate the moment the doors closed behind the humans. "This is unprecedented," Ambassador Kalor of the Araxian Concordat exclaimed. "How could they have developed such technology without detection?" "It must be a bluff," another representative insisted. "A sophisticated hologram, nothing more." Celine remained silent, observing the panic spreading through the council. Even if the ships were real, there were protocols for dealing with upstart civilizations. The core had faced challenges before, but never from humans, never from a species they had so thoroughly underestimated. As the senior diplomatic representative, Celine knew she would be expected to formulate the council's response. But first, she needed information, accurate information, not the panicked speculation currently dominating the chamber. "I propose," she finally said, her authoritative tone immediately drawing attention, "that we adjourn formal proceedings for 2 standard hours. Let us each consult with our respective intelligence services and reconvene with facts rather than fears." The motion passed easily. Everyone was eager for a chance to contact their governments and receive instructions. As the chamber emptied, Celine made her way to her private consultation room. Once the security fields were activated, she connected to a secure channel. "Intelligence Director Tarn, I need everything we have on human military development over the past decade, particularly anything related to capital ship construction or cloaking technology." Tarn, a veteran intelligence officer with a reputation for brutal honesty, appeared troubled. "Admiral, I've already begun compiling a report. The preliminary findings are concerning. We've detected unusual resource movements in the human sphere for approximately 3 years. Large quantities of exotic materials being transported to locations outside our monitoring network. We assumed it was related to their civilian expansion efforts. And the ships? Celine pressed. If they exist as shown, they represent a massive intelligence failure on our part, Tarn admitted. The design characteristics suggest capabilities we've only theorized. The energy signatures alone would require power generation orders of magnitude beyond what humans should possess. Celine absorbed this information with growing unease. Recommendations. Verification first. We need eyes on these vessels. If they exist, then containment. If humans have indeed made this technological leap, they must be isolated until we can assess the full implications. Nodding, Celine terminated the connection. She had served the Council for over 70 years, navigating countless diplomatic crises. But this felt different, a fundamental shift rather than a temporary disruption. When the Council reconvened, the mood had shifted from panic to grim determination. The initial shock had given way to the core world's instinctive response to any threat. Overwhelming force. The hegemony has dispatched the Seventh Fleet to establish a security cordon around human space, Vorn announced without preamble. We have also initiated emergency protocols to revoke all human travel permits beyond their designated sectors. Celine frowned. These actions constitute a significant escalation. Councillor Vorn, have we confirmed the existence of these vessels? Confirmation is irrelevant, Vorn replied dismissively. Either the vessels exist, representing an intolerable violation of the technology limitation treaties, or they do not, in which case the humans have committed an act of psychological warfare against the Council. Both require a punitive response. Ambassador Tajir rose, his expression troubled. I must urge caution. If these ships do exist, a hasty military response could provoke the very conflict we seek to avoid. Your concern is noted, Ambassador, Vorn said coldly. But the security of the Corps takes precedence over diplomatic niceties. Celine recognized the dangerous momentum building in the chamber. The Corps representatives, driven by fear masked as outrage, were marching toward confrontation with dangerous speed. I propose, she interjected, that before any military action is taken, we dispatch a small reconnaissance group, a fact-finding mission, nothing more. Let us at least know what we are facing. After heated debate, a compromise was reached. A scout force of 7 vessels would be sent to the Kepler Expanse, the region where the transmission had originated. Their mission would be strictly observational, to verify the existence and capabilities of the human fleet without initiating hostile contact. Celine volunteered to personally oversee the operation from the command vessel, the Vigilant Observer. As the most senior diplomat present, her presence would ensure that any unexpected encounter could be managed through negotiation rather than reflexive military response. As preparations for the mission began, Celine received an unexpected visitor in her quarters. Ambassador Tajir arrived without announcement, his usual ceremonial attire replaced by simple robes. Admiral Celine, I come to you not as Drexian's representative, but as someone who shares your concern about our current trajectory. Celine gestured for him to sit. Speak freely, Ambassador. The Council is blinded by fear and pride, Tajir said without preamble. If these human ships exist, they represent not just a military development, but a complete re-evaluation of our understanding of humanity's potential. And if they don't exist, Celine countered, then we face a different problem. A species desperate enough to risk everything on an elaborate deception. Either scenario requires nuance, not the blunt instrument Vorn and his allies are proposing. Celine studied the ambassador carefully. Tajir had always been an advocate for greater inclusion of peripheral species in council affairs, a position that had earned him respect from progressives and suspicion from traditionalists. What would you have me do, Ambassador? My duty is to the Council. Your duty is to peace, Tajir corrected gently. Sometimes that means looking beyond the immediate crisis to the underlying causes. Humans have been systematically marginalized for centuries. Is it any wonder they would seek to change their circumstances? Celine didn't respond immediately. Tajir's words echoed thoughts she had carefully avoided examining. "I will maintain diplomatic channels," she finally said. "But I cannot promise more." Tajir nodded, seemingly satisfied. "That is all I ask. Keep the possibility of dialogue open, even when others would close it." After the ambassador departed, Celine turned her attention to the mission briefing. The scout force would depart in 6 hours, once the necessary diplomatic protocols had been observed. She would have to notify the human delegation of the Council's intent to send vessels into the Kepler expanse, a courtesy that Vorn had argued against but was required by existing treaties. To her surprise, the human response came almost immediately. "The Earth United Government acknowledges your notification and will ensure safe passage for vessels on a verified reconnaissance mission. Be advised that approach to within 1 light minute of any Obsidian Fleet vessel by armed craft will be considered a hostile action." The message was neither hostile nor conciliatory, simply a statement of terms. It reinforced Celine's growing suspicion that whatever was happening with humanity, it represented a fundamental shift in their approach to galactic politics. Meanwhile, in a laboratory deep within Earth's lunar facility, Dr. Kai Renault stood before a holographic display of the Obsidian Fleet's flagship, the Defiance. As the chief propulsion engineer and one of the architects of humanity's technological revolution, Renault had spent the past 5 years dedicated to the fleet's development. "The Council scouts will be entering the expanse within 36 hours, his assistant reported. "Fleet Command wants to know if the gravity shield modifications will be ready." Renault nodded absently, his focus on the power distribution schematics floating before him. "The shields are operational. The question is whether we want to reveal that capability just yet." The development of the Obsidian Fleet had been humanity's most closely guarded secret. After centuries of being treated as technological inferiors, humankind had quietly funneled resources into research pathways the core had dismissed as theoretical or impossible. The breakthrough had come when Renault and his team discovered that the Council's understanding of subspace mechanics was fundamentally flawed, limited by cultural assumptions rather than physical laws. The core believed that technological development followed a linear progression. They could not conceive that a primitive species might approach problems from an entirely different perspective, and thus reach solutions that bypassed entire stages of their expected development path. "Dr. Renault, Admiral Zhou is requesting your presence in the command center," another technician called out. Renault sighed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. Like many of the project's scientists, he had begun to realize that their creation had implications far beyond the technical challenges they had set out to solve. What had started as an effort to ensure humanity's security had evolved into something that could fundamentally alter the balance of power in the galaxy. "Tell the Admiral I'll be there shortly," he replied, saving his work with a gesture. "And prepare the shield demonstration parameters. I suspect we'll be giving our visitors a more comprehensive demonstration than originally planned." The scout mission departed Valeri Prime with minimal ceremony. The 7 vessels, 5 from the core worlds, and 2 contributed by mid-tier powers eager to demonstrate their loyalty, formed a tight formation as they entered the hyperspace conduit that would take them to the Kepler expanse. Admiral Celine stood on the command deck of the Vigilant Observer, watching the swirling energies of hyperspace through the ship's visualization system. Unlike most Council officials, who delegated such missions to military subordinates, Celine believed in direct observation. In her experience, reports filtered through the chain of command often lost critical nuances. "We'll arrive at the designated coordinates in approximately 8 hours, Admiral," the ship's commander informed her. "Our sensors are already configured for passive scanning to avoid any perception of aggressive intent." Celine nodded her approval. "And our communication systems? I want to ensure we can establish dialogue immediately, if necessary. All standard protocols are in place. We've also incorporated the human frequency bands they provided, though our technicians note they seem unusual. That caught Celine's attention. Unusual in what way? The commander frowned slightly. They utilize quantum entanglement principles that our systems can recognize but not fully replicate. It's as if they provided us with communication access while simultaneously demonstrating technology beyond our capability. Another piece of the puzzle, Celine thought. Every new detail reinforced the impression that humanity had not just caught up to core technology, but had developed along an entirely different path. As the scout force approached its destination, tension mounted on the command deck. Sensor operators carefully monitored their equipment, searching for any sign of the massive vessels from the transmission. Initial scans show nothing unusual, the sensor chief reported. The expanse appears empty, except for normal stellar phenomena. Celine had expected as much. If the ships existed, they clearly possessed advanced stealth capabilities. Begin the search pattern as planned. Wide spectrum analysis, gravimetric fluctuation detection, all passive measures. For nearly 3 hours, the scout force methodically traversed the expanse, finding nothing but empty space. Some of the crew began to relax, whispering that the human transmission had indeed been nothing but an elaborate hoax. Then, without warning, the sensor arrays erupted with alerts. "Multiple massive objects materializing," the sensor chief called out, his professional demeanor cracking. 17. No, 23 capital-class vessels, appearing from... Admiral. They're emerging from what appears to be localized subspace pockets. The main view screen shifted to show what the sensors had detected. Just as in the transmission, enormous black ships were appearing from seemingly empty space. But now, seeing them in person, their scale became truly apparent. The largest was at least twice the size of any Council dreadnought, with a design that defied conventional naval architecture. "Open communication channels," Celine ordered, keeping her voice steady despite the shock rippling through the command deck. "All frequencies, including the human bands." Before the communications officer could comply, a voice came through the ship's systems, clear, unhurried, and speaking in perfect core standard. "Galactic Council Scout Force. This is Captain Eleanor Reed of the Earth vessel Defiance. You have entered the operational space of the Obsidian Fleet. Maintain your current position. Any attempt to approach within the designated safety perimeter will be considered hostile intent." Celine stepped forward. "Captain Reed, this is Admiral Mara Celine of the Galactic Council. We are here on a sanctioned reconnaissance mission, as acknowledged by your government. Our intentions are peaceful." There was a brief pause before the human captain responded. "Admiral Celine, we're aware of your mission parameters. You are permitted to observe from your current position. We will be conducting standard maneuvers that may answer some of your questions." As Reed spoke, the massive vessels began to move with a grace that belied their size. They formed a complex, three-dimensional pattern that Celine recognized as a traditional combat formation, but executed with precision that the best core fleet commanders would envy. "Captain," Celine said carefully, "your vessels demonstrate capabilities that exceed known human technology by several generations. The Council will have questions about how this development occurred without detection." "I'm sure they will, Admiral," Reed replied, a note of dry amusement in her voice. "But perhaps the more pertinent question is why the Council assumed they were entitled to monitor all human technological development in the first place." Before Celine could formulate a diplomatic response, an urgent alert sounded on the command deck. "Admiral, 3 vessels are breaking formation and approaching at high speed," the tactical officer reported, alarm evident in his voice. "They're not responding to hails." Celine turned sharply. "Our vessels? Who authorized movement?" "The hegemony cruisers, Admiral. They've accelerated to attack velocity and are powering weapon systems." Celine felt cold dread settle in her stomach. Vorn must have placed his own officers on those ships with orders to provoke a confrontation regardless of her diplomatic mission. "Open a channel to those vessels immediately," she commanded. "This is Admiral Celine. Stand down and return to formation. You are acting against direct orders and endangering this mission." Her only answer was static. The hegemony vessels continued their aggressive approach toward the Obsidian fleet. On the view screen, Celine watched as several of the human ships shifted position, interposing themselves between the approaching cruisers and what appeared to be the fleet's command vessel. There was no panic in their movements, no rushed repositioning, just the calm, deliberate actions of a force that had anticipated this scenario. "Captain Reed," Celine tried again. "I cannot control these vessels, but I urge restraint. This action does not represent the Council's intent." "Understood, Admiral," Reed responded, her tone unchanged. "But we have our protocols as well." What happened next occurred with such speed that later, reviewing the sensor logs, the Council analysts would have to slow the recording to 1/10 normal speed to fully observe the sequence of events. As the hegemony cruisers came within weapons range, the human vessels activated what appeared to be energy shields. But unlike any shielding technology the Council had ever developed, rather than the standard particle barriers that glowed with distinctive colors, these shields created visible distortions in space itself, as if gravity were being manipulated at a fundamental level. The lead hegemony cruiser fired its main batteries, unleashing a barrage of energy weapons designed to disable capital ships. The beams struck the gravity distortion field surrounding the nearest human vessel, and simply ceased to exist. Not deflected, not absorbed, but erased from reality as if they had never been fired. Then, with surgical precision, the human ships responded. They did not use traditional energy weapons or missile systems. Instead, focused beams of what the sensors identified as gravitationally accelerated particles lanced out from multiple points on their hulls. Where these beams touched the hegemony vessels, matter simply came apart. Not with explosive force, but with the inevitable surrender of atomic bonds to an overwhelming gravitational gradient. In less than 45 seconds, all three hegemony cruisers had been reduced to expanding clouds of elemental particles. Over 800 Council personnel, gone in less time than it took to announce their destruction. Silence fell over the command deck of the vigilant observer. The tactical display showed the remaining scout vessels frozen in position, their captains presumably as shocked as Celine's crew. Captain Reed's voice, when it came through the communication system again, remained eerily calm. "Admiral Celine, we regret the necessity of that demonstration. The Earth United Government has transmitted formal documentation of this incident to the Council, confirming that your vessels fired first and our response was proportional under the circumstances. The Obsidian fleet will now withdraw. You are free to continue your observations, though there will be little left to see." As Reed spoke, the massive ships began to shimmer and fade, not jumping to hyperspace as Council vessels would, but somehow folding back into the subspace pockets from which they had emerged. "Captain," Celine said quickly, sensing this might be her only opportunity, "before you depart, why now? Why reveal these capabilities after centuries of apparent technological stagnation?" There was a long pause, and Celine thought Reed might not answer. Then, "Because the universe is larger and more dangerous than the Council knows. Admiral, humanity has explored beyond the borders while you've been focused on maintaining your hierarchy. What we found convinced us that we could no longer afford to play by rules designed to keep us subservient. The Obsidian fleet exists not to threaten the Council, but to ensure humanity's survival in a galaxy that's about to become much more complicated. Perhaps you should ask your leaders why they've been so determined to keep certain discoveries to themselves." With that cryptic statement, the communication ended. Within moments, the last of the human vessels had disappeared, leaving nothing but the dissipating particle clouds that had once been hegemony cruisers. Celine stared at the empty space, her mind racing to process both the technological implications of what she'd witnessed and the ominous final words from the human captain. What had Reed meant about discoveries beyond the borders? What could possibly have driven humanity to such a dramatic break, with centuries of carefully managed relations? "Admiral," the communications officer interrupted her thoughts. "We're receiving an emergency recall order from Valeri Prime. All council space is being placed on high alert. We're to return immediately." Celine nodded absently, already composing in her mind the report she would deliver to the council. But she knew that no matter how precisely she described the events, words could not convey the paradigm shift that had just occurred. The galaxy's political landscape had fundamentally changed in less than an hour. By the time the scout mission returned to Valeri Prime, the Galactic Security Conference had devolved into chaos. News of the hegemony cruiser's destruction had spread rapidly, triggering panic among the core representatives and barely concealed satisfaction among many of the peripheral species who had long resented core dominance. The human delegation had departed immediately after the incident, leaving behind only a formal statement reiterating their position. Earth sought no conflict but would no longer accept second-class status in galactic affairs. Councillor Vorn had transformed his grief over the lost hegemony vessels into a rallying cry for military action. "This unprovoked attack on Council forces demands a unified response," he thundered to the assembled representatives. "We must mobilize the combined fleet and show these upstart humans the consequence of challenging the established order." Several core representatives voiced their agreement, but Celine noted with interest that the second-tier powers seemed hesitant. They understood the subtext of Vorn's call to arms. If humans could challenge the core successfully, the entire hierarchy upon which galactic politics was built might collapse. When Celine was called to present her report, she chose her words with care. "The human vessels demonstrated technology significantly beyond our current understanding. Their propulsion, defensive, and offensive capabilities appear to operate on principles that our scientists have theorized but never successfully implemented." "Specifically," Vorn pressed, "they appear to have mastered gravitational manipulation at a quantum level," Celine explained. "Their shields didn't merely deflect energy. They created localized distortions in space-time that effectively removed the incoming attacks from our reality. Similarly, their weapons generated gravitational gradients so intense that they overcame the fundamental forces holding matter together." A murmur ran through the assembly. Even the most militant representatives understood the implications. Conventional military tactics would be useless against such technology. "Most concerning," Celine continued, "was Captain Reed's parting statement. She implied that humanity has been exploring beyond our established borders and has encountered something that prompted this dramatic military buildup." Ambassador Tajir leaned forward. "Did she specify what they found?" "No," Celine admitted. "But she suggested that the Council, or at least its leadership, is aware of these discoveries and has deliberately kept them secret." All eyes turned to Vorn and the other senior core representatives. For a moment, Vorn's composure slipped, revealing something Celine had never seen in the arrogant counselor before: genuine fear. "These are desperate fabrications," Vorn recovered quickly. "Humans attempting to divide us with conspiracy theories while they prepare for further aggression." But Celine could see that the seed of doubt had been planted. The mid-tier representatives were exchanging glances, and even some of the core delegates appeared troubled. "Regardless of what may or may not exist beyond our borders," Celine said, steering the conversation back to immediate concerns, "we must address the reality before us. Humanity now possesses military capability that makes direct confrontation inadvisable." "You suggest we simply accept this violation of centuries of treaty law?" Vorn demanded incredulously. "I suggest we adapt to changed circumstances," Celine countered. "The humans have not attacked our territories or made demands beyond recognition of their sovereignty. Perhaps diplomacy would be more productive than military posturing." The debate raged for hours, but ultimately, pragmatism prevailed over pride. The Council would not immediately pursue military action against Earth, but neither would they accept the new status quo without response. All human trading rights were suspended, their diplomatic recognition downgraded, and a quarantine zone established around Earth-controlled space. It was, Celine thought, exactly the wrong approach, punitive measures that would antagonize without actually addressing the power shift that had occurred. But it was the best compromise the fractured council could achieve. As the conference limped toward its conclusion, Ambassador Tajir sought Celine out once more. "The Council is making a grave mistake," he said without preamble. "These sanctions will only push humanity further away at the precise moment we should be seeking common ground." Celine sighed wearily. "I agree, but Vorn and his faction are too entrenched in their worldview to consider alternatives. They cannot conceive of a galaxy where the core does not dictate terms to all others." "And what about you, Admiral? What do you conceive?" It was a dangerous question, bordering on sedition. But after what she had witnessed in the Kepler expanse, Celine found herself re-evaluating many long-held assumptions. "I conceive of a galaxy where strength does not give one the right to dominate," she said carefully. "Where different paths of development are seen as opportunities for mutual advancement rather than threats to be contained." Tajir studied her with newfound respect. Bold words from the Council's chief diplomatic representative. "Perhaps it's time for bold words," Celine replied. "Reed's warning troubles me. If there is indeed something beyond our borders that prompted humanity's military expansion, we may soon face challenges that require cooperation rather than competition." "You're proposing what exactly?" Celine hesitated, then committed to the course that had been forming in her mind since witnessing the human vessel's capabilities. An unofficial diplomatic channel between those in the Council who recognize the need for change and the human leadership, not to surrender our principles, but to explore the possibility of a new relationship, one based on mutual respect rather than hierarchical control. Tajir's expression brightened. "I've maintained certain connections with progressive elements in the Earth government. They might be receptive to such an approach." "Then let us begin," Celine said, making perhaps the most consequential decision of her long career. Quietly, for now, but with urgency. While the Council's official position hardened into reactionary isolation, Celine and Tajir initiated their clandestine diplomatic effort. Through secure channels and trusted intermediaries, they established contact with key figures in the Earth government, including, surprisingly, Dr. Kai Renault himself. "Your gravity shield technology," Celine said, during their first encrypted communication. "It's based on the Casimir principle, isn't it? A theory our scientists dismissed as mathematically elegant, but practically impossible." Renault smiled thinly. "Your scientists were looking for ways to neutralize gravitational forces. We instead found ways to manipulate the underlying quantum fields that give rise to gravity itself. And this is what allowed you to create the subspace pockets where your fleet was hiding?" "Among other applications," Renault acknowledged. "But, Admiral, I didn't agree to this conversation to discuss technical specifications. I understand you have questions about Captain Reed's parting comment." Celine leaned forward. She implied that humanity has found something beyond the established borders, something threatening enough to justify your dramatic military expansion. Renault's expression grew grave. 3 years ago, one of our long-range exploration vessels ventured beyond the Sagittarius Arm into a region the Council has designated as prohibitively unstable for navigation. What we found was not instability, but evidence of an advanced civilization, one that appears to have been systematically erased. "Erased?" Tajir, who had joined the conversation, asked. "Entire star systems stripped of resources, planets reduced to barren rock, artificial structures of immense scale, shattered and abandoned, and quantum dating suggests this destruction occurred less than 50 standard years ago." Celine felt a chill run through her. And you believe whatever caused this destruction is still active? We know it is, Renault said grimly. We've detected energy signatures matching those found in the destroyed systems, moving inward from the galactic rim. At their current trajectory, they will reach inhabited space within 2 decades. Why wouldn't the Council leadership know of this? Tajir wondered. Oh, they know, Renault said with certainty. We recovered fragments of core world technology from the devastated regions, not just exploration vessels, but military-grade observation posts. The Council, or at least its inner circle, has been monitoring this threat for years, perhaps decades, while deliberately keeping the rest of the galaxy ignorant, Celine concluded, pieces falling into place. Maintaining the pretense of peace and order, while preparing only the core for what's coming. Precisely, Renault confirmed. When we presented our findings to the Earth government, we faced a choice: beg the Council for protection and likely be denied, or develop the means to defend ourselves. The Obsidian Fleet is the result. The implications were staggering. Not only had the core leadership betrayed their own principles by hiding this existential threat, but humanity, supposedly primitive humanity, had independently discovered the danger and created a technological response that might actually stand a chance against it. We need to take this to the full Council, Celine said firmly. With evidence. The hierarchy of species means nothing if the galaxy itself is under threat. The core leadership will deny everything, Tajir warned. They've invested too much in their narrative of superiority to admit such a fundamental betrayal. Then we work around them, Celine decided. We build a coalition of those willing to face reality. Core worlds, mid-tier powers, and peripheral species alike, including humanity. It was a revolutionary proposal, one that would effectively end the political system that had governed the galaxy for millennia. But facing extinction, old prejudices seemed suddenly petty. The Earth government would be open to such an alliance, Renault said cautiously. But not as supplicants, as equals, with full recognition of our sovereignty and technological achievements. That seems a small price to pay for survival, Celine observed dryly. Over the following weeks, as the official council continued its ineffectual sanctions against Earth, Celine and Tajir built their shadow coalition. They shared Renault's evidence with trusted representatives from various worlds, focusing on those with scientific expertise who could verify the findings independently. The response was mixed, but increasingly urgent as more experts confirmed the threat. Some species, particularly those who had suffered under core domination, were initially suspicious of cooperation. Others, especially those closest to the predicted path of the approaching danger, immediately pledged support. Vorn and his allies in the core leadership, sensing the growing movement beyond their control, intensified their efforts to isolate Earth and discredit Celine's coalition. Trade restrictions expanded. Travel was further limited, and propaganda portrayed humans as dangerous radicals threatening galactic stability. But the most damning evidence came from an unexpected source. A mid-level administrator in the hegemony's defense ministry, troubled by conscience, leaked thousands of classified documents confirming everything Renault had claimed. The Corps had indeed known about the approaching threat for over 30 years, and had deliberately concealed it while building their own defensive capabilities. Capabilities that, according to the leaked assessments, would likely prove insufficient. The galactic political landscape fractured along new lines. The old hierarchy of species gave way to a stark division. Those who recognized the existential threat and were willing to cooperate across traditional boundaries, and those who clung to the established order, even as it proved increasingly hollow. In a final, desperate bid to maintain control, Vorn and his closest allies attempted a military action against Earth, not a full invasion, which they knew would fail against the Obsidian Fleet, but a covert operation targeting key research facilities, including Renault's lunar laboratory. The attack was thwarted not by human defenses alone, but by warning signals from Selene's coalition members who had infiltrated the core military structure. When the core strike force arrived, they found not only the Obsidian fleet waiting, but also vessels from a dozen other species who had pledged mutual defense. It was the end of the old order. Faced with unified opposition and the public exposure of their deception regarding the approaching threat, Vorn and his faction lost their political authority. The council reorganized under emergency protocols, with leadership distributed among species based on their contributions to the defensive effort rather than traditional status. Humanity, with its revolutionary gravitational technology, became not just equal partners, but essential allies. The Obsidian Fleet, once viewed as a symbol of human defiance, was recognized as perhaps the galaxy's best hope against the approaching darkness. 6 months after the dramatic revelation at the Galactic Security Conference, a new pact was formalized. Species that had once been rigidly separated by artificial hierarchies now found themselves working together, sharing technologies and strategies in preparation for a threat that would test them all. Admiral Selene, appointed to lead the unified diplomatic corps of this new alliance, found herself once again on the observation deck of a starship. But this time, she stood alongside Ambassador Tajir, Dr. Renault, and representatives from 23 species, watching as a joint fleet conducted maneuvers in the Kepler expanse. The fleet included vessels of all designs and origins, from the massive obsidian ships of Earth to the elegant cruisers of the former core, to the specialized craft of the peripheral species. Each brought unique capabilities, and together they were developing tactics that no single civilization could have conceived. "It's strange," Selene remarked to Renault as they observed the exercises. "For centuries, we believed that order in the galaxy required hierarchy, that some species must lead and others must follow. Now I wonder how much stronger we might have been all along had we simply recognized the value in our differences." Renault smiled thoughtfully. "Perhaps that's the test all intelligent life must eventually face, learning to see beyond the tribal instinct to dominate, to recognize that true strength comes from diversity unified by common purpose." "A lesson we very nearly learned too late," Tajir added soberly. As they spoke, a communication arrived from the long-range sensing posts that the Alliance had established beyond the Sagittarius Arm. The approaching entities had accelerated. The galaxy would face its greatest challenge not in decades, but in years. "We should return to the Council," Selene said, her voice steady despite the gravity of the news. "There's much to prepare." As they left the observation deck, Selene glanced back at the assembled fleet one last time. For all her centuries of diplomatic service, she had never imagined a galaxy united like this, forged not through domination, but through the recognition of a shared fate. Whatever came from beyond the rim, they would face it not as core and periphery, not as leaders and followers, but as equals with a common cause. And perhaps that, more than any weapon or shield, was their greatest strength. The Obsidian fleet vessels, once symbols of human defiance, now formed the vanguard of this unprecedented alliance. Their black hulls no longer absorbed light as a statement of rebellion, but as a promise of protection for all civilized life. And in the vast darkness between the stars, humanity, once dismissed as primitive road pavers for the cosmic highways of greater powers, had found its true place among the galactic community. Not above, not below, but alongside, ready to face whatever terrors the universe might hold. As the joint fleet disappeared into hyperspace, bound for their designated defensive positions, they left behind a message that resonated across all worlds, in all languages. Never underestimate those you once thought beneath you, for in their shadows may grow the very strength you need to survive.